I sat stiffly in the front row, my black scarf pulled tight against the October wind as my children whispered behind me. "We'll take care of everything," my daughter said, her smile sweet but sharp. Not comfort, not grief, control. After 30 years of standing beside my husband, after raising 3 children under his roof, after lowering him into the ground with my own trembling hands, they already spoke as if I was fragile, finished, forgettable. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The October air bit cold against Ada's cheeks as she stood before the polished coffin. Sunlight glinted off the brass handles, sharp and unyielding, as if mocking the weight of the grief pressing down on her chest. The murmurs of gathered mourners swirled in the background, soft condolences, shuffling shoes on damp grass, the muffled cough of someone too impatient to let silence linger. Ada kept her eyes on the casket, numb, her hands folded tightly in front of her like a child afraid of moving out of line. Just to her left, Mason leaned closer to Olivia, his voice pitched low, meant for his sister's ears alone. But Ada caught it anyway. "Dad never said much about what he left behind," Mason murmured, words dripping with suggestion rather than sorrow. Olivia stiffened, giving him a warning glance, but the damage was done. The phrase sliced into the quiet like a blade, pulling Ada's children out of mourning and into calculation. She did not turn toward them. She let her gaze rest on the preacher's lips moving in prayer, though his words blurred into meaningless rhythm. Guests lined the edge of the graveyard, men in pressed jackets, women clutching handkerchiefs. Olivia, ever the organizer, moved down the line, hugging shoulders, touching arms, ensuring no one felt unattended. Her smile was careful, her nods precise, every gesture the model of daughterly composure. Yet when she drifted back toward her younger brother Ryan, Ada caught the whisper. "We'll make sure Mom is taken care of," Olivia said, voice as sweet as lace covering a steel hook. Ryan nodded, his eyes shadowed, as if he wasn't sure whether to agree or to flinch. Ada swallowed against the dryness in her throat. The phrase "taken care of" clawed at her. She'd heard that tone before, years ago, when Daniel's colleagues at the law firm spoke to her like a polite inconvenience rather than a partner. Olivia's cadence was the same, soothing on the surface, condescending beneath. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She had learned long ago that silence was its own weapon, one sharper than any retort. The service ended. A shovel struck earth with a dull thud, the sound of finality. Ada's fingers curled inside her gloves. The crowd dispersed slowly, cars crunching over gravel, until only the immediate family remained. Mason tugged at his tie, Ryan stared at the fresh mound of dirt, and Olivia busied herself with gathering sympathy cards tucked into her clutch. "Let's head back," Mason said finally, his impatience cracking through his attempt at solemnity. "We'll talk things through at the house." At the house. Of course. Daniel's office still smelled faintly of his cologne, the rich leather of his chair holding the imprint of his presence. The thought made Ada's stomach tighten, but she walked ahead of her children without a word. The home was dim, curtains drawn against the afternoon glare. They settled, predictably, around the oak desk that had been Daniel's throne for decades. Mason leaned an elbow across the glossy surface as if claiming it. Olivia perched delicately on the edge of a chair, posture straight, eyes already alive with the wheels of calculation. Ryan hovered by the bookshelf, his hands shoved into his pockets, shifting his weight as though unsure whether he belonged in the conversation at all. "So," Mason began, his voice carrying too much eagerness for a son whose father had been buried hours earlier, "we need to figure out what Dad wanted. He wasn't exactly the most transparent man when it came to his assets." Ada took her place at the side of the room, neither seated nor standing in command. She let them circle like young predators sniffing out territory. Her face remained unreadable, the blank mask she'd perfected over years of marriage to a man who taught her that stillness often earned more than protest. Olivia crossed her legs, adjusting her skirt with careful precision. "We'll handle the accounts first," she said smoothly. "Then the house. The cabin in Maine, too. I'll get in touch with the firm and what about the investments?" Mason cut in, leaning forward, his voice too sharp. "You don't just get in touch about millions of dollars. There's a process." Ada let their voices overlap, Olivia's clipped efficiency sparring with Mason's barely contained hunger. Ryan muttered a weak suggestion that they all slow down, but neither sibling spared him more than a glance. Through it all, Ada remained silent, her gaze drifting to the desk drawers Daniel had locked and relocked, guarding papers he never let her touch. She could feel their eyes flick toward her occasionally, as though expecting her to step in, to guide, to confirm. But she gave them nothing, because in her purse, tucked neatly beneath a folded handkerchief, rested the keys to a penthouse none of them knew existed. Ada brushed her fingers over the leather strap of her bag, a faint current of triumph pulsing beneath the exhaustion. Let them argue, let them posture. The stage was theirs for now. When the time came, it would be hers. The conference room smelled faintly of paper and polish, a sterile calm that felt out of place after the heaviness of the funeral. Afternoon light streamed in through wide windows, catching on the rims of polished glasses set out on the long mahogany table. Ada sat straight in her chair, a black silk scarf draped carefully around her neck, her face composed into its practiced stillness. Across from her, Mason leaned back too far in his chair, ankle propped over one knee, a picture of restless impatience. Olivia sat with her notepad angled just so, pen in hand as though the will were another boardroom meeting she intended to manage. Ryan, shoulders hunched, hovered at the far end of the table, his gaze fixed on the grain of the wood rather than the faces of his family. Mr. Delgado, Daniel's longtime attorney, adjusted his spectacles and cleared his throat. He looked every bit the part. Crisp gray suit, clipped mustache, a voice smoothened by decades of measured reading. The shuffle of papers echoed in the silence. "By the authority vested in me as executor," Delgado began, "I hereby read the last will and testament of Daniel Whitaker." Ada's stomach knotted at the formality of it. Words on a page. Years of life condensed into legal phrases. Delgado's tone never wavered. "The family residence shall remain in the possession of my wife, Ada Whitaker, for her use and well-being. All other assets and holdings shall be cataloged and divided at a later date, in accordance with the laws of this state and the guidance of the executor." A faint scrape of Mason's chair cut through the air. "That's it? Just the house? What about everything else?" "Patience," Olivia murmured, though her pen stilled mid-word. Her eyes flicked to Delgado, sharp and expectant. "Could you elaborate on the properties? Specifically the vacation home, the portfolio?" Delgado raised a hand in caution. "The remainder of Mr. Whitaker's estate requires appraisal and reconciliation. Those matters cannot be settled here today." Mason gave a short, derisive laugh. "Convenient. Dad wasn't exactly organized when it came to keeping records, was he?" His smirk held no grief, only provocation. Ada's hands folded in her lap, fingers weaving tightly together. She forced her expression to remain neutral, though the weight of the purse at her side pressed against her awareness. A secret key nestled inside, one that answered questions none of them had yet asked. Ryan finally spoke, his voice low, hesitant. "Maybe we shouldn't push all of this right now. It's only been a day." Mason shot him a look that burned. "And what? We just wait around while everything gets swallowed in red tape?" Olivia didn't rebuke her brother this time. Instead, she leaned forward, her tone silk smooth but edged. We need clarity for Mom's sake. An appraiser would make sense. Someone impartial. That way, she's not burdened with decisions she shouldn't have to carry. Her phrasing, shouldn't have to carry, landed in Ada's chest like a stone. She kept her eyes on Delgado, though her hearing tunneled in on her daughter's words. Patronizing again, that tone of benevolent control dressed as concern. Delgado nodded slowly. An appraiser is, of course, a common and useful step, but I assure you, Mrs. Whitaker is fully entitled and capable of directing her share of decisions. For a fleeting second, Ada met his gaze. His measured words had landed like a quiet defense, subtle but deliberate. She inclined her head the barest degree, enough to acknowledge the respect he'd afforded her. Still, Olivia pressed on, voice bright, almost cheerful. Of course. We only want to help. After all, it's a lot for her to process. Ada gave no answer. Let them mistake her silence for shock, for fatigue. It cost her nothing to let them underestimate her. She smoothed the edge of her scarf, her face unreadable, her secrets tightly held. Mason exhaled hard, leaning forward now, elbows planted on the polished wood. So, what's next? We just sit around while Dad's assets are sorted? Months of lawyers and accountants dragging their feet? Delgado's brow tightened, but his voice remained even. Estate proceedings take time, Mr. Whitaker. It is in everyone's best interest to let the process unfold without haste. The words did nothing to temper Mason. He slouched back again, jaw working, eyes narrowing as though he were already plotting shortcuts. Olivia wrote something quickly in her notebook. Lips pursed, the picture of quiet calculation. Ryan shifted again, wishing, perhaps, that the floor would open and swallow him whole. Ada remained centered, hands folded, the calm eye of a storm none of them yet knew was gathering. She allowed herself one small thought, an image of the penthouse high above the city, walls that had never echoed with her children's voices, rooms untouched by their scrutiny, her secret sanctuary, her trump card. She would keep it hidden, for now. Delgado stacked the papers neatly, his voice signaling the close of the session. We will reconvene when the appraisals are complete. Until then, I suggest patience, civility, and trust in due process. No one spoke as he rose. Chairs scraped back, the room filling with restless movement. Mason stalked toward the door. Olivia gathered her notes with brisk efficiency. Ryan lingered uncertainly. Ada rose last, her purse close against her side. Her children's words still hummed in her ears. Help Mom. Dad wasn't organized. Shouldn't carry decisions. They believed they were circling prey, but it was not she who was cornered. As they filed into the hallway, Delgado paused beside Ada, his voice pitched low enough only for her. If there is anything Daniel left, unspoken, it would be wise to keep it safe until the time is right. Ada met his eyes. His look was knowing, or perhaps she only imagined it so. Either way, her pulse sharpened. She gave no reply, only the faintest smile, then stepped into the corridor where her children waited. Mason's impatience, Olivia's precision, Ryan's unease, they all looked to her, expecting weakness. Instead, she walked past them, her grip firm on the purse strap. The house was quiet after her children left, their voices trailing into the dusk like echoes that refused to fade. Ada moved through the rooms on autopilot, switching off a lamp here, smoothing the edge of a cushion there, as if performing small rituals of order could keep the chaos of the day from swallowing her whole. When she reached Daniel's office, she stopped in the doorway. The desk still gleamed, polished to a shine by hands that would never touch it again. She turned away quickly, not out of grief, but out of something sharper. Resolve. The purse at her side felt heavier than leather and metal ought to weigh. Later, in the solitude of her bedroom, Ada sat on the edge of the bed. She opened the purse slowly, The zipper's soft rasp loud in the stillness, and drew out the keys. Her fingers traced the worn brass of the largest one, the one Daniel had pressed into her palm all those years ago. Memory tugged at her like a tide, pulling her backward. She could still smell it, the tang of new paint, the faint glue of fresh carpet fibers, the sterile sheen of a space just completed. The elevator doors had opened onto a corridor lined with protective paper taped across the floor. Contractor's boot prints still smudged in dust. Daniel had guided her by the elbow, the way he always did when he was impatient, when he wanted her exactly where he placed her. "Close your eyes," he had said, voice carrying that mix of command and anticipation that always left her uneasy. "Daniel, just trust me." The door clicked open. The hinges sighed. He led her inside, the warmth of his hand firm at her back. When she finally opened her eyes, the world expanded before her. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls stretched across the living room, framing Biscayne Bay like a painting. Water rippling in blue and silver, boats moving like toys across the surface, the horizon sharp against a cloudless sky. Light poured into the room, drenching the white walls until they seemed to glow. She had stood frozen, breath caught in her throat. "This place—" "Penthouse 2, Daniel said, sweeping his arm with the pride of a magician revealing a trick. "Brand new, untouched." The hum of distant traffic reached them faintly, muffled by the glass. Inside, everything was pristine. Marble counters gleaming, chrome fixtures shining under recessed lights. The faint, earthy scent of sawdust lingered where workers hadn't yet finished polishing the last details. Ada walked forward slowly, her heels tapping against the hardwood. "Why here? Why not tell the kids? They'll want to know if we're buying another place." Daniel slipped his hand into his pocket, rocking back on his heels. His expression carried that calculating glint she'd seen so often across the boardroom table when he thought he'd outmaneuvered someone. "This isn't theirs to know." She turned back toward him. "We're family. Daniel, secrets only make things—" He stepped closer, cutting her off with a look. His eyes had always held an unnerving sharpness, like glass shards gleaming under light. "One day, this will be yours. Alone. Do you understand me? Not Mason's, not Olivia's, not Ryan's. Yours." Ada frowned, confused. "Why would you put it in my name?" His smile was thin, a lawyer's smile, never fully warm. "Because silence is power. What they don't know, they can't touch," she had argued. Of course she had. "You're talking about hiding things from our children. Do you hear how that sounds? They'll find out eventually. Things like this. They always surface." But Daniel only moved to the glass wall, looking out at the endless blue as though already beyond her. "Then we'll make sure they surface when it benefits us. Until then, no one needs to know." Not even them. Ada remembered standing there, the weight of his words settling into her chest like stones. She had hated the secrecy, the manipulation embedded in it. And yet, when he pressed the brass key into her hand, cool and heavy, a strange flicker had sparked deep inside her. Possibility. She'd tucked the key into her purse even then, carried it like a burden and a promise, never once letting it slip. Now, years later, Ada held it again, thumb brushing over its ridges. Daniel's voice lingered in her mind, firm and deliberate. Silence is power. For the first time since the funeral, she let her lips part, whispering into the darkness of her bedroom. "And so it is." The words vibrated through her, low and certain. She closed her hand around the key until her knuckles whitened, her face unreadable in the shadowy mirror across the room. Outside, the night deepened. Miami lights shimmered in the distance, faint against the horizon. The city kept its secrets well. So would she. The smell of cinnamon rolls and freshly brewed coffee floated through Olivia's dining room, an aroma carefully staged to suggest warmth. Sunlight spilled across the long farmhouse table, catching the gold accents on Olivia's china. A vase of white lilies sat in the center, immaculate and funereal all at once. Ada sat at one end, her back straight, her hands folded loosely around the cup Olivia had pressed into them. Steam rose in lazy curls, fogging the rim of her glasses. Around her, the clatter of forks against porcelain and the low hum of voices created a simulation of family harmony. But Ada felt the staging in every detail, as if she were a guest at her daughter's theater of control. Mason wasted no time. He leaned across his plate, brushing crumbs from his shirt cuff. "We should start talking about liquidating some assets," he said, loud enough for the two neighbors Olivia had invited to hear. "Especially the penthouse. No point in letting something like that sit when it could fetch top dollar." The words hung in the air like smoke. Ada's gaze did not shift, but her pulse ticked hard against her throat. The penthouse. He spoke as if the one they all knew, the downtown apartment Daniel occasionally used for business, were already his to sell. He didn't know. None of them did. Ryan cleared his throat, tentative. "Maybe it's too soon. I mean, Dad's—" He stopped himself, glancing toward Ada, shame coloring his cheeks. "He just passed. Maybe we wait before we make decisions like that." Mason's laugh was sharp, cutting. "You think buyers wait around for sentiment? That place will only appreciate if we act quickly." Olivia set her coffee down with delicate precision, her bracelets chiming as she leaned forward. "Mason's right. We need to be proactive. Besides," her eyes flicked toward Ada with an almost theatrical softness, "Mom shouldn't have to worry about these things. She's fragile right now." Fragile. The word landed like a slap masked as a caress. The guests, two women from Olivia's charity circle, tilted their heads in unison, offering Ada pitying smiles. One reached across the table to pat her hand. Ada let her lips curve into a polite line, neither smile nor frown. She lifted her cup and sipped slowly, the bitterness of the coffee grounding her against the swell of heat rising inside her chest. Fragile. That was how Olivia wanted her painted. A porcelain figure too delicate for truth. Someone to be managed rather than heard. Mason pressed on, emboldened by the sympathetic audience. "If Dad wasn't organized, it's up to us to clean things up. The penthouse is the logical first step. Get it appraised, list it, done." Ryan tried again, softer this time. "But what if Mom wants—" "Ryan!" Olivia's voice snapped like a whip, though cloaked in sugar. "Please, don't complicate things. This is about helping her, not burdening her." Silence pressed heavy after that. Ryan looked down at his plate, shoulders caving inward. Mason smirked, satisfied. Olivia turned her attention back to the neighbors, spinning the narrative of dutiful children rallying around their grieving mother. Ada remained still. Her hands rested lightly on the porcelain cup, though every muscle in her arms ached with the effort of restraint. Anger flickered sharp and bright in her chest, but she forced it into stillness. She would not give Olivia the performance she wanted. Her gaze drifted past the table, past the carefully curated flowers, to the sunlit window beyond. In her mind, she saw it again. The untouched penthouse, too, its white walls gleaming in daylight, the wide glass opening to Biscayne Bay, untouched, waiting, not for them, for her. The conversation rolled on around her, filled with Olivia's careful assurances and Mason's hungry interruptions. The neighbors nodded, clucked sympathy, admired Olivia's strength. Ada sipped her coffee once more, the steam clouding her glasses, concealing the glint of something sharp in her eyes. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The power, after all, was in silence. Mr. Delgado's office sat high above Brickell Avenue, its glass walls framing the restless city below. The afternoon sun gilded the skyline in a hard, metallic light, bouncing off mirrored towers and rippling through the bay beyond. Inside, however, the atmosphere was calm. Dark mahogany shelves lined with neatly arranged legal volumes, a Persian rug softening the sharp edges of power. Ada sat opposite Delgado at a polished walnut desk, her purse resting in her lap like a shield. The hum of the city outside barely reached them. The office was sealed in quiet. Delgado adjusted his glasses, leaning forward, his expression composed yet attentive. "You asked for privacy," he said, voice even. "No appointments after yours. We won't be disturbed." Ada nodded once, then opened her purse. From within, she withdrew a slim leather folder. Daniel's folder, one he had insisted she keep in her possession but never explained aloud. Her fingers moved deliberately, though her pulse quickened as she laid the papers across the desk. Delgado leaned closer, scanning the documents. His brow furrowed as he read, then smoothed again into neutrality, though a flicker of surprise lingered in his eyes. "Penthouse 2," he murmured, tapping the deed with a careful finger. "Titled solely in your name." Ada folded her hands in her lap, her voice steady but low. "Daniel arranged it years ago. He told me it was mine alone. I didn't tell the children. They believe they know everything." Delgado exhaled slowly, the sound of someone absorbing the weight of a revelation. "Mrs. Whitaker, this is no oversight. It's airtight. Irrevocable." He must have known exactly what he was doing. For the first time in days, Ada allowed herself to release a fraction of the tension binding her chest. She had carried this secret like a stone, fearing its edges might crumble under scrutiny. But hearing Delgado name it, airtight, steadied her. His eyes lifted to hers, serious, searching. "Do they know?" Ada shook her head once. Not a word. A pause lingered. Outside, the faint shriek of a gull carried across the bay, muffled by the glass. Inside, the only sound was the faint rustle of Delgado's sleeve as he set the papers back down, aligning them neatly, as though giving order to the power they contained. "Keep it that way," he said finally, his voice edged with quiet gravity. "That penthouse isn't just property. It's a fortress. When families fight over estates, secrecy is often the only safeguard. This," he gestured to the deed, "is untouchable. Yours, without contest." Ada inhaled slowly, her breath filling her lungs with something she hadn't felt since Daniel's death. Security. The room around her sharpened, each detail clearer, the gleam of polished wood, the faint smell of old leather, the rhythmic tick of the clock on the far wall. She thought of Olivia's brunch table, Mason's smirk, Ryan's caved shoulders. They had circled her like vultures, feigning concern while plotting division. But here, in Delgado's office, she finally felt ground beneath her feet. She placed the deed back into the folder, her hands deliberate, protective. "Then it stays between us." Delgado inclined his head, a gesture of solemn agreement. "Discretion is my profession. But understand this, Mrs. Whitaker. Once they sense something exists beyond their grasp, they'll press harder. Secrets draw hunger like blood in the water." Ada's gaze did not falter. "Let them press. They'll find nothing." For a long moment Delgado studied her. Perhaps he expected frailty, the widow cast as fragile, as Olivia had painted her. But what sat across from him now was something steadier, harder. He seemed to recognize it. His voice softened. "Daniel trusted you with this for a reason. Hold it close, and when the time comes, use it wisely." Ada rose, smoothing her scarf over her shoulder, purse tucked firmly against her side once more. She looked out through the wide glass walls at the bay's restless shimmer. The penthouse stood somewhere out there, high above the city, untouched, waiting, For the first time since she'd laid Daniel into the ground, Ada felt the faintest ember of control burn in her chest. She walked to the door, each step measured, her hand brushing once against the purse strap, as if reminding herself of what she carried. Not fragile, not cornered, not theirs to manage. Hers. The front door rattled beneath a sharp, insistent knock. Before Ada could reach it, Mason's voice carried through the wood, clipped and impatient. "Mom, open up. We need to talk." She pulled the door back to find him already stepping inside, shoulders squared as if the house itself belonged to him. The air carried the faint tang of his cologne, aggressive and synthetic, clashing with the lavender she had lit in the entryway. His jaw worked tight as he dropped his sunglasses onto the console table without asking. "Where's Olivia?" Ada asked softly, though she already knew. "She's parking." Mason strode past her, into the living room, his presence filling the space in a way Daniel's never had. Daniel had commanded quietly. Mason demanded by force of volume. Moments later, Olivia entered, heels striking against the hardwood with precise rhythm. She carried a leather folio tucked under her arm, her face composed but her tone sharp with strain. "I've been the one coordinating everything. Delgado. The accounts. Even the funeral bills. Mason helps when he feels like it. Ryan? He doesn't even answer his phone." As if summoned, Ryan appeared in the doorway, shoulders hunched, eyes darting between his siblings. He carried no folder, no plan, just a hesitant presence. "I'm here, aren't I?" Mason gave a dismissive snort. "Barely." Ada remained standing near her chair, hands folded in front of her. Her eyes moved from one child to the next, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence often drew more from them than words could. Olivia laid her folio on the coffee table and opened it with a crisp flick. "We need clarity. Delgado won't move fast enough, and Dad's assets are scattered. Someone has to take responsibility." She fixed her gaze on Ada, her expression wrapped in gentle concern, but her words edged with steel. "You shouldn't have to shoulder this. You've been through enough." Mason cut in, voice louder, sharper. "Exactly. That's why we need a power of attorney. Streamline everything. One of us," his eyes flicked to Olivia, then back to Ada, "should be authorized to act on your behalf. Save time. Avoid mistakes." Ryan shifted uncomfortably. "Do we really need to? I mean, Mom can still—" Mason turned on him instantly. "Still what? You think she wants to drown in paperwork and court filings?" "Be realistic, Ryan." Olivia sighed, smoothing her skirt with delicate fingers. "This isn't about taking anything away from her. It's about protecting her, making sure she doesn't get overwhelmed." Ada lowered herself into the armchair, her movements slow, deliberate. She let her gaze drift to the folio on the table, pages bristling with tabs and neatly highlighted notes. The words, fragile, protecting, overwhelmed, echoed with the same cadence as Olivia's brunch, the same false softness. She placed her hands lightly on the armrests, her face composed in quiet confusion. "I'm not sure I understand all of it," she said, voice thin but steady. "It sounds complicated." Olivia leaned forward instantly, eyes brightening with triumph. "Exactly. That's why it's best if one of us manages it. You'll have peace of mind." Mason's tone carried less silk, more demand. "We'll draw up the paperwork. Delgado won't care as long as you sign it. This way, nothing gets lost in the shuffle." Ada inclined her head slightly, the faintest gesture of agreement. "If you think that's best." Her voice betrayed nothing more than polite acceptance, but beneath the calm surface, fury licked like fire. They spoke as though she were already diminished, as though her hands were too weak to hold a pen. Ryan opened his mouth to speak, but faltered under Mason's glare. His gaze dropped to the rug, his protest swallowed. The conversation moved in circles after that. Olivia detailing next steps, Mason pacing like a man closing a deal. Ada let them speak, nodding at intervals, her face a mask of compliance. Each word rolled over her without cracking her stillness. At last, Olivia gathered her papers. Mason reclaimed his sunglasses. Ryan trailed behind them with quiet reluctance. The door shut on their voices, leaving the house abruptly still. Ada stood where she was for a long moment, her pulse drumming in her ears. Then, slowly, she reached for the deadbolt and turned it with a firm click. The lock engaged. A clean, final sound. Exhaling deeply, she leaned against the door, her hand resting on the wood. The fury she had suppressed swirled beneath her ribs, hot and alive. But so did something steadier. They believed they were building a cage around her. They didn't see she already held the key. The doorbell rang just as the evening light softened into gold across the living room. Ada hesitated before answering, half expecting Mason's impatience or Olivia's clipped efficiency to be on the other side. Instead, when she opened the door, she found Marjorie, her oldest friend, standing there with a foil-covered casserole dish balanced carefully in her arms. "I figured you hadn't eaten a proper meal in days," Marjorie said, brushing past with the familiarity of decades. "And don't even try to argue. Chicken tetrazzini solves more problems than most men ever could." Ada managed a smile, faint but genuine, and followed her into the kitchen. Marjorie moved with easy confidence, slipping the dish into the oven to warm, pouring 2 glasses of red wine from the counter as though she'd lived here herself. When she finally sat across from Ada at the small kitchen table, the only light between them came from a trio of candles Ada had lit earlier, tiny flames wavering against the dusk that pressed at the windows. "You look like you're carrying something heavier than grief," Marjorie said gently, sliding one of the glasses toward her. Ada wrapped her fingers around the stem but didn't drink. For days she had said nothing, even as Mason barked demands and Olivia cloaked her orders in silk. But Marjorie's presence, the warmth in her eyes, the blunt kindness in her voice, pulled at something Ada had kept locked tight. She drew a slow breath. "There's something I haven't told them. The children." Her voice barely rose above the soft flick of the candle flames. Marjorie tilted her head. "Then maybe you should tell me?" Ada hesitated, then leaned forward, lowering her voice as though the very walls might betray her. "Daniel bought another place years ago. A penthouse. Not the one downtown that everyone knows. Another. He put it in my name alone. No one else knows it exists." For a heartbeat, silence hung heavy. Then Marjorie laughed, a short, incredulous burst that filled the kitchen. "Well, Ada Whitaker, I'd say that's the smartest move your husband ever made." The sound startled Ada into a smile she hadn't expected. But the weight of secrecy pressed her back down. "I feel guilty keeping it from them. It feels like theft, like I'm hoarding something that should be theirs." Marjorie leaned across the table, her eyes narrowing with conviction. "Listen to me. Guilt is for people who don't know what survival means. Your children have been circling you like sharks since Daniel died, haven't they?" Ada swallowed, her gaze dropping to the dark swirl of wine in her glass. "Yes. Mason talks about liquidating, Olivia about managing everything. Even Ryan, he stays silent, but he doesn't stop them. They talk as if I'm—" She paused, voice tightening. "Already gone." "Then you owe them nothing," Marjorie said firmly. "Daniel left you something solid, something only yours. If you want to survive this storm, you hold it tight. Don't you dare feel guilty for protecting yourself." The words settled into Ada's chest with unexpected force. She sipped the wine finally, the taste bold and dry on her tongue, filling her with a warmth she hadn't felt since before the funeral. The candles flickered, shadows shifting across the walls as the evening deepened. For the first time, Ada allowed herself to imagine stepping into Penthouse 2, not as a secret she bore, but as a space waiting for her. Not Daniel's design, not her children's inheritance. Hers. Marjorie lifted her glass in a small toast, to silence and to strength. Ada raised hers, the faintest smile tugging at her lips, to survival. As the glasses touched, Ada felt the sharp edges of guilt soften, replaced by something steadier. Quiet pride, a secret no longer a burden, but a shield. The flames burned low, but steady, their glow mirrored in her eyes. The morning sun was thin and unforgiving when Mason arrived, his energy already sharp as a blade. He spread a thick stack of papers across Ada's dining table, the columns and graphs cluttering the polished wood like an invasion. "These are the numbers," he said, his finger jabbing down on a row of projected figures. "If we move quickly, the penthouse could sell for top dollar. Wait too long, and the market dips." Poof! He snapped his fingers. Gone. Ada sat across from him, hands curled around her coffee cup. She lowered her eyes to the pages without reading them. The numbers blurred together in her vision, columns of urgency she had no intention of acknowledging. Before she could speak, the front door opened without a knock. Olivia stepped in briskly, her heels tapping against the tile. A stranger trailing behind her. The woman was tall, sleek in a blazer the color of wet stone, clutching a leather portfolio. "I thought it best to get a professional perspective," Olivia announced, her tone calm but decisive. She gestured toward the woman with the easy authority of someone unveiling a solution. "This is Ms. Harrington. She specializes in high-end properties." Ada's pulse flickered, but her face remained still. She had not invited them. She had not agreed. Yet here they were, filling her space with their plans, their voices, their momentum. Ryan lingered in the hallway, his arms folded across his chest. "This is too much. You can't just barge in with a realtor like this." Olivia's glance toward him was brief and sharp. "Don't be dramatic. We're trying to help Mom before values slip further. Condo prices are already trending down. If we don't act, we'll lose money." "Money," Ryan muttered, his tone bitter. "Always money." Mason barely looked at him, already flipping through another page. "Ryan, stop. You're out of your depth. This is business, not feelings." The realtor, Harrington, stood silent but poised, her smile professional and cool. "If I may," she began, "properties like your father's are in demand now, but the window is closing. Listing within the next few weeks would guarantee strong offers." Ada's grip on her coffee tightened. The steam curled upward, masking her expression. "Wolves," she thought. Their voices layered over one another. Olivia's precision, Mason's force, Harrington's polish, all circling, closing in. Ryan's voice cut through weakly. "But maybe Mom doesn't want to sell. Maybe we should—" "Ryan," Olivia interrupted, the same tone she'd used at brunch, low but merciless. "Please, don't make this harder than it has to be." He fell silent, his shoulders slumping. Ada lifted her eyes at last, scanning the faces around the table. Mason, eager. Olivia, resolute. Harrington, professional but hungry. Ryan, uncertain, small. The air thickened with their urgency, with the unspoken belief that she was fragile, incapable, in need of management. Inside, her fury coiled tight. They knew nothing. Penthouse 2 lived only in her silence, untouched, unseen. While they fought over projections and trends, she carried in her purse the deed that made their urgency irrelevant. She placed her cup down gently on its saucer, the porcelain clinking in the silence that followed. She did not argue. She did not explain. She let them believe she was considering, weighing, absorbing their logic. Because silence, as Daniel had once told her, was power. And in that silence, she gripped her secret tighter than ever. The folder shook faintly in Ada's hands as she set it on Delgado's desk. The blinds were half drawn against the harsh Miami sun, stripes of light cutting across the dark wood, across her face. Delgado's expression was calm, but his eyes sharpened as he opened the folder and scanned the first page. Mason's signature leapt off the document. Neat, deliberate, too confident to be true. The text above it claimed Ada's authorization for power of attorney. "He forged this," Ada said flatly, no tremor in her voice, though her pulse hammered in her throat. "He came into my house with Olivia, spoke about protecting me, and then left this tucked into the pile. If I hadn't checked..." Delgado slid his glasses higher on his nose, studying the page. His lips pressed thin. "Brazen," he muttered, "and sloppy. This is not even close to legally binding. Still, had you signed where he wanted, it would have created a mess." Ada sat straighter, relief laced with fury. "He wants control. Olivia wants control. They treat me as though I've already lost it." Delgado looked up, his voice calm but firm. "We can block this immediately. I'll file notice with the court. Mason will find himself cornered the second he tries to move with this paper." Ada exhaled, steadying herself. "Good. But I want more than their failure. I want my own defense." Delgado arched a brow. "What do you mean?" "I want copies of everything," she said, her tone crisp, controlled. "The deed to Penthouse, too. Daniel's trust documents. Every statement. Every line of paper that proves what is mine." She leaned forward, her eyes hard. "If they plan to circle me like wolves, I need teeth of my own." A flicker of respect crossed Delgado's face. He nodded. "Very well. I'll have my assistant prepare certified duplicates of the entire file. Originals remain with me, but your set will be ironclad." Ada's lips curved, the faintest suggestion of triumph. "Good." Hours later, she carried a new leather binder against her chest as though it were a living thing. Inside, her fortress on paper. Proof, signed and sealed, that her children could not touch what Daniel had left in her name. By nightfall, she stood inside Penthouse 2 for the first time since the funeral. The building's private elevator opened onto polished marble floors, the faint scent of cedar polish lingering in the air. The space had waited years for this moment, untouched, a secret chamber reserved only for her. She crossed the vast living room, glass walls stretching before her, revealing the sweep of Biscayne Bay under the rising moon. The water shimmered in silver and black, restless, alive. In the study, she placed the binder into a cabinet Daniel had once shown her, a heavy mahogany piece with a discreet lock. She slid the key home, turned it until the mechanism clicked. The sound was final, satisfying. She straightened, her fingers brushing the polished surface, then drifted out onto the balcony. The night air rushed against her face, warm and salted, carrying the faint tang of ocean spray. Below, the city pulsed with lights. But up here, she was alone, untouchable. For the first time in weeks, Ada let herself close her eyes. She inhaled deeply, the breeze wrapping around her like a whisper. In it, she heard Daniel's voice, steady and assured, the way he'd sounded when he'd first pressed the key into her palm. "Well done." Her chest tightened, but not with grief. With certainty. Ada opened her eyes, looking out across the water. "They will never know," she murmured. "Not this place. Not what it holds." The wind carried her words into the night, scattering them across the bay. She stood taller, the binder locked behind her, the ocean vast before her. Here, she was no one's fragile widow. Here, she was free. Olivia's dining room gleamed as though prepped for a magazine spread. Crystal glasses caught the chandelier's glow, and silver cutlery lay aligned with surgical precision against linen napkins folded into fans. A roast sat in the center of the table, its savory aroma filling the air, but the tension among those seated around it soured the elegance. Ada sat at the head of the table, placed there by Olivia with ceremonial courtesy, though everyone knew the host controlled the room. Olivia flitted between seats, pouring wine, correcting a fork's alignment, touching shoulders with performative warmth. Mason sat to Ada's right, his posture restless, his knee bouncing beneath the table. Ryan occupied the far end, his hands folded, his expression already wary. The meal began with the hollow chatter of neighbors in passing, Olivia recounting a charity committee meeting, Mason half listening, Ryan staring down at his plate. Ada cut small pieces of her food, chewing slowly, her silence shaping the room more than words could. It didn't take long. Mason leaned forward, his knife clinking against the rim of his plate. "We need to stop dragging our feet. The penthouse needs to go on the market now." Olivia set her wine glass down with deliberate grace. "He's right, Mom. The longer we wait, the more risk we take. Condo values are already slipping." Ada dabbed at the corner of her mouth with her napkin. Her voice was soft, steady, and cutting through the hum like the first drop of rain in a storm. "Not yet." Mason's head snapped toward her. "Not yet?" His laugh was sharp, incredulous. "You don't get it, Mom. This isn't about waiting until you're ready. This is about timing, strategy. You can't handle this." The words hung in the air like a slap. Olivia flinched but didn't intervene, her silence an endorsement of his impatience. The chandelier's light shimmered over their tense faces, catching the flash of Mason's clenched jaw, the stubborn set of Ada's shoulders. For a long beat, no one moved. Then Ryan's hand came down hard on the table, the sound jolting through the room. Silver rattled, glasses trembled. "Enough." His voice was louder than anyone had ever heard from him, firm with a conviction that startled even himself. The room froze. Ryan's eyes locked on Mason, then Olivia. His voice shook, but only with the force of holding back years of silence. "She is stronger than both of you, stronger than you'll ever give her credit for. You act like she's fragile, like she needs handling, but she sees through you. Every word, every move." He leaned forward, his palms flat against the wood. "She doesn't need you, and she doesn't need me. She's already more than you'll ever be." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ticking of the clock in the hallway seemed to halt. Olivia's lips parted, but no words came. Mason's face flushed crimson, his rage pushing against the limits of control. Ada sat very still, her hands folded loosely in her lap, her gaze fixed on her youngest. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, she smiled. A faint curve at the corner of her lips, quiet and unyielding. She revealed nothing, not the penthouse, not the binder, not the fortress of secrets she had built, only the strength that silence afforded her. The meal sat untouched, cooling beneath the chandelier's light. The family that once believed themselves her wardens now sat in stunned quiet, as though the ground had shifted beneath their feet. Ada lifted her wine glass, the ruby liquid catching the light, and sipped calmly. The power was hers, and none of them yet understood why. The neighborhood was quiet when Ada pulled into her driveway late in the afternoon, but the silence didn't feel ordinary. It felt watchful. Across the street, Mason's driveway stood conspicuously empty, his prized black Mercedes gone. Only faint grooves where the tires had sat remained in the concrete. Ada paused with her keys in her hand, her gaze lingering. Mason had always flaunted that car, washing it on Sunday mornings, leaving it idling in front of restaurants so valets would admire it. For it to vanish so suddenly could only mean one thing: repossession. Her breath steadied as she entered the house. The pieces shifted in her mind like a puzzle snapping together. Mason's impatience, his hunger to liquidate, his constant urgency. He wasn't strategizing, he was drowning. The next clue came 2 nights later. Olivia had insisted on taking Ada out for dinner, framing it as a treat, though her smile carried strain. They sat at a chic bistro in Coral Gables, candles flickering in glass holders, waiters gliding by with practiced efficiency. When the bill arrived, Olivia slid her platinum card into the leather folder with a flourish. But minutes later, the waiter returned, his voice hushed but firm. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The card was declined." The table stilled. Olivia's smile faltered, her cheeks flushing as she fumbled in her bag. "That's impossible. Run it again." The waiter nodded politely, but when he returned, the result was the same. Declined. Olivia's lips tightened as she produced another card, forcing a laugh that rang too brittle in the elegant dining room. These banks and their glitches. Ada said nothing, but she watched closely. Olivia's hand trembled as she signed the receipt. By the time they stepped out into the humid Miami night, Ada's certainty solidified. Mason and Olivia weren't circling her out of ambition. They were starving, desperate for what they believed lay locked in her grasp, and they would devour her to get it. The next morning, Ada sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee cooling between her hands. The house was still when the doorbell rang. She opened it to find Ryan standing awkwardly on the porch, hands shoved deep into his pockets, eyes darting to the ground before meeting hers. "Can I come in?" he asked softly. She led him inside, and he sank onto the edge of the sofa like a boy again, shoulders curled, knees close together. He rubbed his palms against his jeans, searching for words. "I should have said more," he began, voice low. "At Olivia's dinner, I spoke up, but it wasn't enough. I let Mason talk over me, let Olivia act like I didn't matter, like you didn't matter." He shook his head, his jaw tight. "I'm sorry." Ada lowered herself into the armchair opposite him. She studied her son, the weariness in his eyes, the faint slump in his posture, the guilt that wrapped around him like a chain. He was not like Mason, not like Olivia. His weakness wasn't greed, it was doubt. She leaned forward, reaching for his hand. "Ryan," she said gently, "you spoke when it counted. That matters." His fingers tightened around hers, hesitant at first, then firmer. "I don't know what they're planning, but I can feel it. They're hiding things from me, too. And I—" He faltered, his eyes searching hers. "Sometimes I think you're hiding something, too." Ada's breath caught, but her face remained composed. She didn't answer right away. Silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. Then she gave his hand a squeeze. "I'm glad you're here," she said simply. Ryan's eyes softened, though the unspoken suspicion lingered in the air. He nodded once, then leaned forward and embraced her. The hug was awkward at first, stiff, but it lingered. And when he pulled back, there was something steadier in his expression. "I'm on your side," he said, "no matter what." Ada watched him leave, the door closing gently behind him. She stood in the quiet afterward, her heart heavier than she expected. Ryan's loyalty had deepened, but so had his instincts. He sensed the fortress she had built, though he couldn't see its walls. She would not confirm. She would not deny. But she knew, as she walked to the window and looked out at the fading Miami light, that Ryan had just shifted from a bystander to something else entirely. An ally. And allies were dangerous things, because they wanted truth. Sunday morning sunlight slanted through the tall, stained glass windows, casting fractured blues and reds across the pews. The choir's voices swelled, but the notes floated past Ada like smoke. She sat in her usual place near the aisle, hymnal open in her lap, her lips moving faintly though no sound escaped. Around her, the sanctuary hummed with more than prayer. Whispers carried between hymn verses, cutting through the solemnity like static. Mason's name surfaced in low tones, paired with phrases Ada didn't need to strain to catch. "Bad deal. lost investors, car gone overnight. She didn't lift her head. She turned a page in the hymnal, fingers steady, expression composed. Across the aisle, Olivia sat upright with the rigid poise of someone performing for the crowd. Her pearls gleamed against her blouse, her smile fixed too long on anyone who looked her way. When a woman leaned close to murmur in her ear, Olivia nodded brightly, too brightly, brushing it off with a laugh that cracked faintly at the edges. Ada's gaze slipped past her daughter to the altar. The white cloth gleamed in the sun, pure and unbroken. Her hands folded neatly over the hymnal as she listened to Olivia's facade unravel in those tiny cracks. Behind her, footsteps paused. A hand touched her shoulder lightly. Ada turned to find Donna, her neighbor of 30 years, the kind of woman who never traded in half-truths. Donna lowered herself into the pew beside her, leaning close enough that the cinnamon of her chewing gum cut through the air. "You gonna tell them?" Donna whispered, her eyes sharp, knowing. Ada's pulse fluttered, but her face betrayed nothing. She shook her head once, a slow and deliberate refusal. Donna studied her for a beat, then nodded as if she understood more than Ada had said. The hymn rose around them, voices strong, but Ada remained silent, her thumb pressed lightly against the edge of the page. She didn't need to sing. Her silence spoke more clearly than words. The gossip swirled on, about Mason's collapse, Olivia's strained perfection, Ryan's absence from the social stage. Ada sat in the center of it, immovable, the storm curving around her like wind against stone. When the final hymn ended and the congregation spilled out into the bright Florida morning, Ada walked slowly down the church steps. Donna kept pace beside her, hands clasped behind her back. "Not all gifts are meant to be shared," Donna said quietly, not looking at her. Ada let the words settle. Her lips curved into the faintest smile as she descended the last step, her shoes clicking softly against the pavement. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. In her silence, she carried more than secrets. She carried power. The storm came not with thunder, but with the violent slam of Ada's front door against the wall. Mason's voice followed, jagged and loud, tearing through the quiet house. "You think you can play games with us? With me?" Ada stood in the living room, hands resting on the back of a chair. She did not startle, though the air seemed to quiver around his rage. His face was red, his hair disheveled as if he'd run a hand through it too many times on the drive over. Behind him came Olivia, heels clicking in sharp rhythm. Her hand clutched a folder thick with papers, the edges bent, as if they'd been shoved together in haste. Her voice was sharp but controlled, her fury wrapped in polish. "We know something isn't right. We've combed the records, the accounts, the holdings, and there's a hole. Where is it? What are you hiding?" She flung the folder onto the coffee table, papers spilling across the wood in a scatter of frustration. Ada's eyes drifted down to the mess of ink and signatures. She didn't move to pick them up. Instead, she drew in a slow, steady breath, her expression serene. "You found nothing," she said softly, "because it's mine." The words landed like stones in water, rippling outward. Mason's jaw dropped, then clenched so hard a vein throbbed at his temple. Olivia froze, the composure slipping from her face for a fraction of a second before she recovered, her mouth pressing into a thin line. Mason's voice dropped into a growl. "You don't get it, Mom. This isn't about you. This is about family, about survival. If you won't help us, then you're against us." Ada lifted her gaze to him, her eyes calm, unyielding. "You threatened that the moment you forged my name." Olivia stiffened. Mason turned away, pacing like a caged animal, fists flexing. "If this is how you want to play it," he spat, "then don't expect me around anymore. Don't expect me at holidays. Don't expect me when things get ugly. You cut yourself off." Ada's reply was even, her tone steady as glass. No, Mason. You already did at the funeral. The words froze him in place. Olivia's mouth parted as if to scold him, but no sound came. The silence stretched, heavy and merciless, filling the room with more weight than Mason's shouting had carried. Finally, Olivia gathered the scattered papers with trembling hands, shoving them back into the folder. She straightened her shoulders, her voice taut. "You're making a mistake, Mother. One you'll regret." Ada didn't answer. She didn't have to. Mason yanked the door open so hard it rattled against the frame. Olivia followed, her perfume trailing sharp and cold in their wake. The door slammed shut, the sound reverberating through the empty house. Ada stood still, her hand resting lightly on the back of the chair, her heartbeat steady. The air was thick with the residue of their anger, but she did not flinch. They had come for war, and she had given them silence. Silence that cut sharper than any blade. The elevator rose in a silent glide, carrying Ada and Ryan higher into the city. Neither spoke as the floors ticked upward, the hum of machinery a quiet heartbeat in the background. Ada kept one hand on her purse strap, the key warm against her palm. Ryan stood beside her, his shoulders tense, his gaze fixed on the glowing numbers above the door. When the elevator stopped and the doors opened, Ryan drew in a sharp breath. The penthouse stretched before him like a hidden world, light spilling through the floor-to-ceiling glass, the bay glittering in the late afternoon sun. The vast living room gleamed with untouched polish, as if time itself had been waiting here. He stepped inside slowly, as though afraid his shoes might disturb the silence. "Mom, what is this?" His voice was hushed, not accusing, not demanding, just stunned. Ada moved past him, her heels tapping softly across the hardwood. She set her purse on the marble counter and turned toward the view. "This," she said, her voice even but carrying something deeper, "is mine." Ryan followed, his eyes wide as he took in the expanse. He pressed a hand against the cool glass, gazing out over Biscayne Bay, where boats cut white trails across the water. "I never knew." His words trailed off, swallowed by awe. Ada's chest tightened. For weeks, secrecy had been her shield, her silence her power. Now, standing with her youngest child in this sanctuary, she felt that armor soften. "I never told you," she admitted quietly. "Not you. Not your brother. Not your sister. Daniel put it in my name years ago. He called it insurance. I called it silence." Ryan turned toward her, searching her face. But there was no greed in his eyes, no calculation, only a flicker of understanding. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I don't want anything from you, Mom. I just wanted to see you happy again." The words pierced something inside her. Ada felt her throat tighten, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. She looked away, out over the bay, afraid that if she met his gaze, the dam would break. For so long, she had been the fortress, the still surface over raging waters. Now, with Ryan standing beside her, the waves threatened to crest. She exhaled, steadying herself, but her voice trembled when she spoke. "Happy is not something I've felt in a very long time." Ryan reached out and rested a hand on hers where it lay against the railing of the balcony. His touch was tentative, respectful, but solid. "Then maybe it starts here." For a moment they stood in silence, the ocean breeze carrying the scent of salt and jasmine from the gardens below. Ada let the wind wash over her, cooling the heat of her unshed tears. She turned finally, meeting his eyes. If Olivia or Mason knew about this, they would tear it apart. They'd turn it into numbers, into leverage. They'd strip it of meaning. Ryan nodded, his jaw set. "Then they'll never know. I promise you. This is between us." The certainty in his tone steadied her. She studied his face, the softness still clinging to him despite his years, the quiet strength he so rarely showed, the loyalty that had survived the storm of his siblings' greed. "You're sure?" she asked. "I'm sure." His grip on her hand tightened just enough to seal it. "You don't have to fight them alone. You still have me." The tears came then, unbidden but quiet. Ada didn't sob. She simply let them fall, streaks of salt cooling against her cheeks. She had steeled herself against Mason's rage, Olivia's patronizing control, even Daniel's sharp commands when he was alive. But Ryan's simple loyalty undid her in ways she hadn't expected. She pulled him into an embrace, her arms wrapping tightly around his shoulders. For once, he didn't pull back or shift awkwardly. He held her firmly, as if anchoring her to the truth of his words. When they finally stepped apart, Ada turned again toward the view. The sun dipped lower, painting the water in gold and copper. The city hummed faintly below, but up here it was quiet, sacred. "This place," she said, more to herself than to him, "was meant to be a fortress. But maybe it can also be a home." Ryan stood beside her, his silhouette reflected in the glass. "As long as you let me visit," he said softly. "It already is." Ada allowed herself a small smile, faint but real. For the first time since Daniel's death, she felt not only safe but connected. No longer an island, but a shore her son had chosen to stay upon. She still carried secrets, still guarded her silence. But in Ryan's promise, she found something she thought she had lost forever: family. The sky was still dark when Ada stepped out onto the balcony of Penthouse 2, the Atlantic stretching before her in endless shadow. The air was cool, damp with salt, carrying the low thunder of waves crashing against the shore far below. She set a small vase of fresh lilies on the table beside Daniel's photo, the glass catching the faint light of the coming dawn. His face stared back at her from the frame, polished silver edges reflecting the dim glow of the city still asleep. She studied the photo for a long time. Daniel, immovable in his dark suit, his eyes sharp, that lawyer's half-smile etched like stone. For years, he had been the voice in her ear, teaching her restraint, the art of silence. Now, with only the sea as her witness, she wondered if he had truly meant for her to inherit strength, or merely obedience. The first streaks of orange broke across the horizon, light spilling slowly, softly, into the room behind her. The waves below struck harder, foaming white, the sound rising like applause from the earth itself. Behind her, Ryan shifted in his chair. He had been awake with her all night, saying little, his presence a quiet anchor. He sat wrapped in a blanket, his coffee cooling untouched beside him. When she turned, his eyes were on her, not greedy, not questioning, simply present. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked softly. Ada shook her head. Her hand brushed across the cool balcony rail as she stepped closer to him. "I've done too much sleeping through life already." She lowered herself into the chair beside him. Together they looked eastward, watching as the black water slowly blued as the sun began its climb. Ada reached into her pocket and silenced her phone without glancing at the screen. Calls had been coming all morning, Mason, Olivia, alternating between persistence and fury. Their names had lit up again and again, but she had not answered. She would not. Ryan noticed, his gaze flicking to the device before returning to the horizon. He didn't press. That was his strength. He did not pry, did not demand. He simply waited. Ada leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment, letting the wind play across her face. The salt stung faintly at her lips, the sound of the sea filling her chest with something close to peace. "Do you regret it?" Ryan asked finally. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "Keeping this from them?" She opened her eyes, looking at him, her son, who had grown into a man still uncertain of his own strength. The faint lines at the corners of his eyes reminded her that time was moving forward, that nothing was permanent but change. "No," she whispered. Her voice carried no hesitation. "Silence was the best decision I ever made." Her words floated between them, caught in the dawn air. For so long, silence had been her weapon, her shield. But in this moment, it was no longer defensive. It was her truth. Ryan's shoulders eased, and he gave her the smallest of nods, as if the answer released a burden he hadn't known he was carrying. The sun broke free from the horizon then, brilliant gold flooding the glass, washing over them both. The light caught Daniel's photo, igniting it in a halo that flickered against the silver frame. Ada leaned forward, placing her fingertips gently against the glass. "Do you see?" she murmured, her voice not meant for Ryan. "I carried your silence like a chain for years, but now—" Her throat tightened. "Now it's mine." The waves below crashed harder, the sound rolling upward until it filled the balcony like thunderous applause. Ada closed her eyes, letting it wash over her. When she opened them again, she no longer looked at the photo. She looked forward, toward the horizon, toward the widening day. The past could stay in its frame, contained and silent. The future was hers alone. Ryan reached for her hand, not gripping, not holding, simply resting his fingers lightly against hers. The gesture was enough. Together they sat in the rising light, the city stirring behind them, the sea alive before them. And Ada, no longer Daniel's widow, no longer her children's pawn, rose with the sun. Her silence had become her freedom. Her freedom, her future, hers.